Okay, we are at 12:01 and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Nazak Habasha. I'm the Policy Affairs Manager for the League of Women Voters of Ohio. And today we are going to have a voter service training on reaching homeless and housing insecure voters in Ohio. In this webinar, we will hear from social service providers about the challenges that homeless voters face in Ohio, and how to connect with those populations and help them cast their ballot with ease and confidence. We'll also review the rules and logistics of voting for other transient voter populations, like those who are in the military, incarcerated voters, students, and young adults. Our guest speakers today are Sasha Bowers, who is 33 years old. She was born and raised in Columbus and grew up in the homeless population with her mother and younger sister at the facility that she works at today, the YWCA. Sasha advocates for those who haven't found the voice to advocate for themselves and has worked with people of all ages in different living arrangement capacities for over 15 years. Marcus Roth is the Director of Communications and Development at the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. Marcus joined Ohio in 2015 after a decade of reporting on Ohio's state government for Gongwer News Service, where he covered ongoing debate tax policy, healthcare, voting rights, predatory lending, clean energy, and a host of other issues. Prior to moving to Ohio, Marcus lived in Virginia, New York City, and Spain, where he worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and stonemason. Originally from Philadelphia, he earned a BA in English literature from the University of Virginia. And finally, Tonya Wichman is the director of the Defiance County Board of Elections. Tonya is a certified election registration administrator and Ohio registered election official. Thank you to all of you for being here with us today. And I'm going to just hand the mic to Sasha. Sasha, thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. So as you've heard, I work at the YWCA Family Center here in Columbus, Ohio, where, of course, I was a homeless youth with my mother and sister growing up here. And so I've seen the challenges firsthand of how it is for those who are in a homeless situation to even get the voice to go and vote. We have an issue where it's a lot of, I don't think my vote counts. But as a youth, I was doing a lot of promotion of getting out the vote, doing a lot of events with other youth groups to help adults go and sign up, register to vote and where they needed to go, and just really promoting it from a youth perspective, like, hey, it's important for you to do this. Whether you think it matters or not, there is something in that, in what is on the ballot that's going to be very helpful, potentially can make a big difference. So I just think, that the challenge really right now is, especially where I'm at in the position I'm in right now, I, help residents find employment and the resources that they need. So in my resource center here, I always keep stock of the laws that are going on, things that are going on in the city. In Ohio, I keep a voters registration sheets so that we can work through and walk through. This is what it looks like, and I'm always just letting them know if these resources are available, because some just don't think of that. They're in a crisis. So a lot of times, even in the crisis, there is some time where it's like, we can think. Let's think about the things that especially once I leave here, I want to be able to keep it a routine. Every year I want to, make sure I'm voting on something that matters. And sometimes you don't know what really matters because you don't know what all it entails. You're just listening to, everyone else. So it's kind of being able to give them that thought process that we can sit down at our computers and be unbiased about what is going on here and saying, hey, these are things that are going to be on the ballot. These are the laws that are going around. These are something that you can think about. So when they do come up, they know if they want to vote on X, Y, and Z. We have been, since I've been in this position for maybe about 6 months or so, I've been able to really get a couple of our residents on board for registering to vote and trying to figure out where they're supposed to go vote. So those are, those will be challenges because with our facility, they don't stay here long. So for them to know when they move to their next location, where am I going to go vote? always make sure to give them the information of the board election so that they can go and say, hey, they can pop online and find out where their registration needs to be, where they need to register for, and where they need to go vote. Another issue that I do see is that it's a transportation, and that's a big thing for a lot of homeless or those who are housing insecure, is that they don't have sometimes the ability to get to where they need to go so that they can vote. Sometimes it's, a lot of times we have the work being an issue, and then they're like, oh, I'm too tired to go after work, or trying to go stand in line and then go vote. So we always give them the option to know that there's an absentee ballot. Try to just provide a lot of those resources for them, because they are, again, in a crisis, and they're transitioning a lot. So a lot of things are happening, but I see it as an opportunity to really engage our residents into what's typically going on around Ohio, what's going on in their county. Those are things that are, they're important, and it helps also show that it's helpful to help. It's helpful to see them, go out and do it or talk about it, especially when their children are around, because it can also lead off to them and show a sense of like, I feel like I'm responsible as a citizen to do these type of things. This teaches your children that they can be involved and know, what's going on around the world, and how they can get out, and when they get older, vote. But also as a young person, they can help be like, hey, like I did, with other groups of youth, let's get out the voice. Let's say, hey, this is what's going on. It's very important to vote. These are the dates. This is when things are happening. So I think that an easy for us to meet them where they're at, it's going to be more helpful to kind of get them more engaged in the voting piece, because like where I'm at, we're one facility. We have 50 rooms. We have tons of families in and out, but to be able to go to, what I've been doing is going to their doors, because they have a room. So I go to their doors and say, hey, this is what's going on. Here's your voter registration information. If you want, here's how to do this. You can always come to see me. I'm located in this area at this time. You can always ask about me if you need help. Any of our staff is willing to help you. And I always put my staff on board, that even though we work in separate departments, everyone knows, like, this is what I'm trying to do in my resource center. So it's not just me helping them with employment, but there's other resources. So they know that these things are available. And I think that that's really where it is right now, with us starting to really get them engaged, and me getting more engaged into the voting piece in this position that I'm in, because I've always been doing it for so long, but in a different capacity.
So Sasha, in the position that you have at the YWCA as a workforce development specialist, you mentioned that you do voter service work. And so I'm just curious, I know that that's something that you're passionate about. Is it something that you've taken upon yourself, or is it something that is a part of your job description?
It is something that I've taken upon myself, just from me, just again, having that experience and having that passion for it. I just took it upon myself to make sure I knew that those resources were in there when I first got into the position, but it just seemed like it wasn't really being, put out there, so people didn't know. So I kind of would move it around so people would identify that this is here. And always, just have those conversations with them, especially now that, it's getting time to really vote for things. I've taken on initiative of being that head front here. And so that also has helped at our downtown site, because now they're trying to do like an initiative just to get the women there to know, hey, we want to get out the voice, so I've been working with them to try to get them on, on the page too.
Fantastic. So we have a lot of people on our call who are from our local leagues, and they often have the goal of trying to reach out to homeless shelters or populations who are housing insecure. Do you feel, I know that you're probably not going to be able to speak to every homeless shelter in the state, but what do you feel is the best way for them to address such organizations or centers that might not have this work going on? Who's the person to contact? How should they do it? Do you have any tips for them on, you mentioned meet people where they're at, and how would they go about doing that?
Right. I would say as far as others, shelters in general, finding who like the direct person, like the social service or someone who does like the diversity, they will be your top lead people because they're the ones who are going to be like leading those or even being able to engage those conversations with a homeless person per se, because all facilities are different. Like the men's one, they may not all stay there at the men's shelter. The women may not all stay at the women's shelter. They may be in and out. So if that resource can get to them, and then, if a local lead could speak with that person in particular and kind of give them the, conversation of this is what we're trying to do, and then giving them that information, they can be able to, really help promote and link up with the leagues.
Great. And so when you've had conversations with people at the YWCA, you've mentioned that voting is not going to be like obviously even remotely a top priority for people, and that's understandable. They're facing some very serious challenges. But when you do have conversations with people, do you feel like it's something that they are open to listening to, or is it something that requires some work to open them up to the topic?
For me, it depends on the person. And you can kind of get to tell like how they respond, how a resident may respond to certain conversations. And that kind of gives me that open lead to be like, okay, well, this is, it may take me a little bit more work to kind of tell them about it, but then there's people who are easily able to just sit down and listen. And I'm pretty open and friendly here. So most times they'll just listen and be like, okay, now tell me more, or, they'll take what I'm giving them and then they'll come back and ask me questions if they don't have that at that point. So it's kind of more of a what their capacity is, but at the same time, if it's my approach, it's just how smoothly I provide that information to them, how I talk to them and not at them and things like that.
So with that, I have one more question for you.
Mhm.
For the local leagues who want to try to get voters registered in homeless shelters or help them to get out the vote, do you feel that a better approach would be to try to get into the shelter themselves, like a person or a group of people, or would it be to work through the shelter and to train people at the shelter to register voters and to have conversations about voting?
If it's possible, it will be to bring someone to the shelter and like say set up a table or something. But if you're coordinating with, for example, for me, if you're coordinating with me, I always make sure that you have what you need. So, a table, and I'll provide that stuff ahead of time. Hey, so and so is going to be here to help you register to vote or have any voters questions, things of that sort. Now, if you don't have a person in my position, yeah, definitely just being there and just kind of giving that information so that they know, because sometimes they just don't know, and no one else in the shelter is really because it's not really their motive, like it's not their thing, they're not going to really talk about it much. So they don't have enough information and resources to give them.
Yeah. And so I would just say to all of our local leagues that are on with us also, keep in mind that there's not going to be a Sasha Bowers at every homeless shelter in the state. And so make sure that when you call, you're having discussions with people at the homeless shelter or wherever it might be, so that you can get registered, people registered to vote or to talk to them more about voting. Thank the person who was on the line with you for allowing you to come in and talk to people and get them registered to vote. But also, I think it's very helpful, as Sasha said, to give people a heads up, right? So ask the person that you're working with, hey, can you let people know that we're going to be there and this is who we are and we're a trustworthy, source in the community, and they can talk to us and they can ask us questions. I think priming people, I mean, I can say, like, for example, I work a lot at the, Islamic Center here near my home, and if non-Muslims come into our center, I think it's always like, I know it's very different, but if you kind of like prime people to say, hey, this group is coming in to do such and such work, then, they're not going to be maybe weary of them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sasha, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, so they're not going to be weary of them when they do come in and they're, who are these people? They've already kind of been internally like primed to
Mhm.
know that this is a trustworthy community source and you can work with them and talk to them. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And if anybody has any more questions for Sasha, please put them in the Q&A and we can get them to them at the end of our webinar. I'm going to transition to Marcus. Marcus works on a more statewide level, not in direct social service with the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing. And he'll talk to us a little bit more about just kind of like a macro view of this kind of work and the challenges that people face and the challenges that organizations face. Thank you, Marcus.
Thanks. Yeah, that's right. Ohio, we are a statewide nonprofit that basically fights for adequate funding and better policies to end homelessness and expand affordable housing in Ohio. So we're not working directly with folks, at the direct service level like Sasha is, but we greatly appreciate when we can find somebody like Sasha who's inspired and cares about these issues, because we do have a voting program, and it is, in my experience, everybody in our world kind of thinks it's a good idea, like voter engagement is something that they should be doing, but it's always at the end of the to-do list. It's the last thing. Because there's so many other pressing concerns. So it can be a slog. And a lot of times it's just a matter of finding somebody like Sasha that, one contact that really kind of gets it and, is inspired and is working in a program that can really help open the door. So we, as I mentioned, we basically work at the state level, and we work with the congressional delegation to try to, improve policies and funding for housing insecure populations. We also do a lot of training and technical assistance for the providers, the people that are working in the shelters and the supportive housing programs across the state. We have a youth homelessness program. We also have a housing information line that you might find helpful at some point, or know people that need help. Just understanding what the law is regarding landlord-tenant law, and if you know somebody or your son or daughter is having problems with a landlord, they can call the rent info line, and that I'll put that information in the chat box. So as I mentioned too, we operate a voting program we've called Ohio Votes. We've partnered with the League over many years, and some other organizations. A lot of it is sort of around trying to get other nonprofits, and particularly in the housing homelessness sector, more engaged in voting. Our capacity ebbs and flows depending on the year. So it is great when we're able to partner with groups like the League to try to help increase our capacity, get out the message. And we really appreciate having, folks at the local leagues willing to help step up and register folks and get out the vote. So I figured I'd give a little bit of background about housing insecurity in Ohio. Research shows that the main cause of homelessness is the lack of affordable housing. There is a huge gap between what people earn and the cost of rent, and that gap has been growing over decades now, and it's suddenly getting a lot worse, actually. We put out a report recently that shows, on a statewide average, a tenant needs to earn about $17.05 an hour, working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, just in order to be able to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. And when you look at what jobs in Ohio actually pay, only 2 out of the 10 most common jobs, the jobs with the most openings, actually pay that amount. So there's an awful lot of people working that aren't really earning enough just to be able to afford housing. When you have that kind of a situation, it's inevitable that some people are not going to be able to make it. They're going to need help. And that's the situation we're in. In Ohio, there's nearly 400,000 households that spend over half their income on rent. Obviously, when you're spending that much on rent, you don't have much left over for other things, necessities of life, food, childcare, education, everything. So, and all that data is based on basically before the pandemic. So when the pandemic came along, What we know is it's basically made everything a lot worse, especially for low income folks that were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Um, One of the things that changed, everybody's talking about inflation. One of the main drivers of inflation are housing costs. And, we've seen home prices skyrocketing. There's been a lot of coverage of that. Along with that, because so many people that were maybe in that area, that kind of income level, they were considering buying a house, but now it's just gotten too expensive. They couldn't buy a house, so they're going to continue to be renters. That basically means there's a lot more people in the renter market, and the people that are at the lower income levels can no longer afford the rent. So rent prices in Ohio have increased more than 12% in 1 year. That's about 3 or 4 times the typical year. And it's been 20, if you look 2 years back from the beginning of the pandemic, rent increases went up 23% in 2 years. That is way beyond anything we have ever seen. We see that, there's a lot has happened in, with the eviction moratorium and emergency rental assistance, basically has prevented what, you would expect a huge increase in homelessness. We haven't quite seen that yet. There has been an increase in unsheltered, but across the board, it hasn't been an explosion of homelessness like a lot of people are concerned about yet, but eviction filings have really increased. So that's despite all this federal relief money. So we're seeing a lot more evictions. And we do anticipate, down the road, things don't change pretty soon. We are going to see more homelessness. And it's starting already. So with that backdrop, we are really thrilled that, folks in the league want to help us, mobilize and engage people at the low income levels who are experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. People, I think, when you look at the data too, people in this population have some of the lowest voting rates. I probably don't need to tell you all that, but, people get evicted. There's a lot of challenges when people get evicted. They lose everything in a lot of cases. They don't, the documents, they don't have all the stuff they need. They don't have a stable address. So even if you're kind of driven and motivated to actually show up and vote, a lot of times it's just difficult because of all that red tape that is so much harder to take care of when you're housing insecure. So as I said, a lot of people in our network kind of think voter engagement is a good idea, but it is not always at the top of the list. And there's also a fair amount of misunderstanding that, any kind of voter engagement risks, getting ensnared, I guess, in the, the partisan activity prohibition on nonprofits. So we have to do a fair amount of clearing up the fact that yes, 501c3s can mobilize voters. You can't talk about who to vote for, but you can certainly talk about the need to get people to turn out and vote. You can talk about the issues, just not candidates, basically. So we have to do a lot of that, just kind of convincing people in our network that this is something that they can engage in. So to get to the actual sort of, what it's like registering folks, people who are experiencing homelessness can be a really challenging population to engage because, as Sasha mentioned, there are so many bigger, more immediate problems that they're dealing with. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's in full effect with people that are experiencing homelessness. They're basically just trying to, trying to get access to food, water, shelter, and sleep and safety. So civic engagement is much higher on that pyramid. Sort of the self-actualization tier on the pyramid. And so one of the things when you're talking to people, I think it's good to really bring a trauma-informed mindset to this work. For example, trying to guilt trip somebody about why they should vote, and, doing your civic duty really isn't going to work when you're talking to people who can barely afford to eat. In a lot of cases, people are just, they might be gruff. They've got a lot of other things they're dealing with. You know, you have to have a thick skin and just not take those sorts of things personally. So that's one, you know, one recommendation from people who've done a lot of this work. So, and you know, obviously having somebody, if you are able to set up a table in a shelter or housing program, it's great to have somebody from that community sitting at the table, or at least helping, you know, talking to other people in the agency, directing folks to the table, if, you know, so try to find somebody who seems sympathetic, you know, and able to try to help you engage. A little bit about the system. Shelters, everybody's familiar with. They are really the front line of the homeless system, essentially triage. A lot of times they're kind of chaotic and people are under a lot of stress. Shelters may not always be the best place to try to engage voters because of the crisis. And a lot of times too, and particularly what we've heard a lot about, you know, the staffing shortages across the board. A lot of shelters are really experiencing staffing shortages intensely. And so the staff that are there are already overworked. We find that supportive housing may be a better place, definitely, you know, a better place to really try to engage voters. Supportive housing, permanent supportive housing is basically housing where people who have experienced long-term homelessness, people who have behavioral and or physical disabilities are working, you know, they're able to live there stably and work on overcoming their challenges. So the population is basically a lot more stabilized. People, and my experience has been that when you show up and you start talking about voting and these sorts of things, people are way more appreciative of the attention, and you know, they're just glad that somebody's there. And you know, I think it's also part of that sort of self-actualization kind of, you know, where the road to becoming like, you know, feeling like you're part of it's like society is, you know, being able to vote. I think they really get that message, you know, where this is like sort of a self-empowerment kind of thing. They're at that stage in supportive housing to try to, you know, really make a difference. So some of the other places you might want to consider, and there's senior housing places. If you can get in one of them, one of those facilities might be a good place. We've also set up tables at eviction court during a pandemic here in Columbus, when we had the eviction court taking place at the convention center, and there was just so many people. Basically, you know, obviously they're in a state of crisis, but at the same time they're standing there in line with nothing to do for hours. So a lot of times, you know, they're willing to fill out a registration form while they're standing there. You know, it's other places to try to engage folks: food banks, community centers, health centers. So those are some places that might be good places to try to set up a table. And just some considerations, sort of review some of the things, you know, you want to try to make things as easy as possible for the staff. You know, you don't want to ask a lot of them questions and ask if you can move the furniture around and things like that. You want to just come and be prepared to be as self-sufficient as possible, because as I mentioned, people and staff in particular can be very stressed. They aren't always, and a lot of times they're willing to help, but you know, just try to make it as easy as possible for them. Obviously, ID requirements, what the law says around identification is a major question for a lot of folks in this population. So be real clear on what the ID requirements are. And, you know, I know that Tonya is going to talk more about all that stuff. So, and be real clear on, you know, the fact that you can still register and you can vote without a driver's license or a stable address. And the other thing that I think it's good to be real clear about as far as voting rules is the fact that people with criminal conviction can vote. There's a lot of misunderstanding that if you've ever had been convicted felony, you're not able to vote anymore in Ohio, and that's just not true. So we have all those facts straight, and that's probably some of the bigger issues you're going to encounter. How to help people, people with disabilities, how they can access, voting. Those are all good issues to be really clear on when you're working with this population. And so we, Ohio, can help you try to coordinate your voter outreach if you want to try to access homeless and housing programs in your area. You can contact me, or my colleague Ken Williamson is really the main guy on the Ohio Votes program here. He wasn't able to join today, so I'm filling in for him. I'll put our contact info in the chat box in a minute. We could probably help. We have some funding for mini grants too, if you want to try to help, set up a table. And we're also collecting some pledge cards. So our funder, Nonprofit Votes, is asking for, these help fill out some of these pledge cards. The idea basically so that we get their contact info and we can follow up when it's election time. Just remind people, it's early voting. You can vote here, such a place. So trying to get some of those pledge cards collected. We also have at Ohio Votes, Ohio, we produce a couple different kinds of posters, and we can send those out to you if you want. We have these posters and this one here. And we also try to help coordinate some of the materials you might need at a table. We found that the ACLU has a really good card about felony, voting with a felony conviction. All the information is there. Of course, the leagues stuff is really good. This one in particular, and ACLU also has one with voting with disability, and I think the league does as well. Those are really helpful. So I think that was about all I was going to say, and I'll pass it back to you, Nazak.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Really appreciate all that you've shared with us today and kind of setting the landscape on a macro statewide level of what we need to know about homelessness and housing insecurity in Ohio. A few specific questions about homelessness in Ohio. Bill Davis asked, can you talk about people temporarily housed in motels and who pays for that?
Typically, it's the local agency, that is receiving funding, and there was a lot of movement into the hotels during the pandemic. Obviously, initially for public health reasons. Congregate shelters are, as you can imagine, a lot of people living in tight quarters where the virus could spread very quickly. So there was a big movement to try to spread out the population as much as possible, and hotels and motels really stepped up. And it was kind of helpful for them too at the time because they were nobody was traveling and staying in hotels and motels at that point. So there was also a lot of funding that came from the coronavirus relief legislation, and so a lot of that funding helped provide. Basically paid the costs of folks staying in hotels and motels. There's, it depends on the specific program, and there's also local philanthropic dollars that go to help with some of that as well.
And you mentioned that instead of prioritizing a homeless shelter, there was a second type of housing facility that was preferable. Can you tell us what that is again? And is that something that a person
it's permanent? Yeah, permanent supportive housing is the type of facility. There are a number of them around the state, and like National Church Residences. Folks have probably heard of them. They operate quite a few around the state. They're often maybe 100 units, 150 units or so. And it's, as I mentioned, it's basically part of the Housing First model, where people who have been living on the street for a long time that have disabilities, a lot of times it's mental illness, a lot of times it's addiction issues. They're able to basically move off the street into supportive housing and have a place to live with, essentially where they don't have to worry about getting evicted And what we find is that when you give people a place to live and you offer the services, you don't require services, you don't require them to go to AA, or you don't require them to, you know, see a counselor and all, and job training, but it's all right there. You offer it to them. They're able to stabilize and, you know, take advantage of that, all those services in a much more successful way than sort of the older model, which is like, you can stay in this apartment as long as you're clean. And, you know, well, as soon as you fall off the wagon, you're out of here. That, what we found is that just doesn't really work for most people. So supportive housing is kind of the more modern approach. And, you know, people sometimes are only there for years, sometimes they're there for years and years, but it's, you know, really a much more successful model of getting people stably housed when, you know, some of the, and basically targeting the folks that are really like have the biggest challenges, you know, they've been on the streets for years and dealing with mental illness and things. So, we've worked with some supportive housing programs, and, you know, I did a training, or just sort of I guess a voter engagement kind of event at one of the ones here in Columbus, and people were really engaged. They were like, you know, happy for me to show up, and they had all kinds of questions, and a lot of it was just explaining how government works. And it was, you know, they were like curious about, you know, just sort of the nuts and bolts of government. Yeah, I remember making the point, you know, that you can vote on judges, you know, and this is sort of like a lot of people are like, wow, you know, so that the judge that might have like locked you up a couple years ago for, you know, vagrancy or whatever, you actually can vote on that guy. You know, you can vote against him or her, you know. It's so there is like a real empowerment kind of experience, I think, that comes for people once they're, and, you know, some people that may be in crisis that are like at the shelter level, but also I think people are more receptive, you know, once they're not worried about, you know, where they're going to spend the night, I think, generally. But and also, I mean, because you're moving when you're still literally homeless, you know, your address is changing constantly. All those things are so much harder to, you know, just being able to return the mail. I know somebody asked a question about that, so I'm sure Tonya will cover that. But, you know, a lot of those nuts and bolts things about like staying registered, even if you've managed to send your registration card in, or it's a lot harder to maintain all those things.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And an additional thank you also for just kind of setting the human landscape of why people fall into the problem of homelessness and housing. I think it's very easy for people to make assumptions or to downplay such, you know, populations and the challenges that they face. But beginning from low wages that don't really support individuals, particularly single individuals with families. I have a not for nothing, but I have a graduate degree, and I would not be able to support my family on my income alone. You know, so it's just a sad state of affairs that we are in currently, not to mention, you know, people that might be facing mental illness or addiction crises or whatever it may be, which is not particularly the subject of our topic today. But, you know, in order for us to engage in this really important work, we really need to approach it with empathy and understanding, so that we have the right motivation as we go in. And when we are, I think, properly motivated, we can be better able to connect with people and help them. I think one of the most important parts of all of this, other than just, you know, increasing our voter registration and voter outcome numbers, is just when a person, I think, understands the impact that they have, that even though you might be facing any number of issues related to homelessness or addiction or whatever it might be, you have the same equal vote that anybody else in this state or country has. That there's a level, I think, of like dignity and decency that person is given when they understand that they have the right to vote if they are an eligible voter, no matter what their personal circumstances may be. So thank you for including that. I really appreciate it. I definitely want to give enough time for Tonya to talk about all the rules and things that we need to know to make sure that people are properly registered to vote. We definitely have the most questions for Tonya. So I'm gonna pass the mic to you. Thanks for being here, Tonya.
Not a problem. I want to thank you, first of all, for letting me be a part of this. I learn every time I talk with you guys how it's working from the outside. I know there's always that we're demonized sometimes by some of the rules we have to enforce, as are you guys when it comes to lawsuits and everything that everybody's got going on. I can only speak from my office. We want everybody to vote. I can assure you every election official wants everyone to vote. It's kind of a nightmare right now, or you wouldn't be doing this if you didn't care. But we have like the agencies that are already mandated with the state, like Job and Family Services, the BMV, those types of places, Department of Mental Health, the Treasurer's Office, all of those places that are mandated to offer this. They're great, and we are offering it. The problem we're seeing is, like, for instance, Job and Family Services. They're offering it to everyone who comes in for like their WIC opportunities, those types of things, but they're not explaining it to them. They're adding it to the packet, so they're not completely filling them out all the way, because I think they think if they don't fill out their voter registration card, they won't get their benefits. So we have no access to find these people. So, I mean, we've gone to the point of searching Facebook and trying to message them, or calling, sending letters to where they lived before, looking for family members, that type of thing. That makes it difficult for us to make sure when they show up to vote that they're going to have that opportunity. We also have issues like at the colleges. My daughter just graduated from Ohio State a couple years ago, and her first year there, of course, she's very well trained in responses to people who are misinforming her. They had people driving around on golf carts telling them they had to register at their college address, and then they would drive them to the polls, or they had to register here because this issue that's happening in this community, they need to vote on it. They weren't explaining the fact that that is temporary housing, and by law, yes, you can register at your college address, but then you are no longer registered at home. So when all of their parents who were either on the ballot or really supportive of an issue were furious that we couldn't send their child a ballot at college, we had to explain the misinformation that's happening. And it's not one party or the other. It's not one organization or the other. It happens across the United States. In my personal opinion, I wish they couldn't influence that on a campus. I wish that, we go to the college campus when they have their Constitution Day at our college here in town, and we explain all of their options. We find the websites if they want to vote from home. If they're from out of state, we'll take their registration, send them to any county they're from here, and then also offer them the opportunity to register in our county. It's just, I think there's not enough information being given out, or there's just enough to be dangerous sometimes. And that's the same with like our homeless voters. I spoke earlier with this group and stated that Defiance isn't highly populated with homeless voters. I've worked with a handful of them over the years, and we have registered them at our local PATH center. I would love to find a better way to work with everybody. In the past couple of years, we've had some red tape thrown at us with collaboration issues that we have to be very careful in our positions. I do a lot of things on my own time, so it's not affiliated with the office, even though it can be kind of looked at that way. But as much as we can, we want everybody to have this opportunity. I don't know if getting there, I know the presidential year, Uber and Lyft also gave the option of driving people to the polls. I don't know if that would be something your groups would be able to touch base with them on. I cannot. Our elderly, if they can't get to the poll and they don't want to vote by mail, we've worked with our senior services, and they'll pick up our voters and bring them to the polling locations for us. So there's groups out there. I don't know how to best solve this problem, but we would love for that to be. I don't know if offering a stamp, which we can't do, offering a stamp for them to mail their ballot back if they have trouble getting to the polls. There's a lot of things I would love to help with and fix that I'm not allowed to, but if your groups have that opportunity, we want to see it happen.
So if I may interrupt you, Tonya, only because this has been a topic of debate in the league on offering a stamp for mail-in ballots. You are not, as a member of the league, allowed to put a stamp on someone else's ballot because it is a thing of value. And so that is not something that we are allowed to do. You can do it for your daughter, your sister, your cousin, you know, as an individual, that's your business, but we don't set up voter registration tables, you know, or any kind of tabling event where we offer people stamps or anything of value because they are going to vote. We can only offer, let's say, you know, a very simple example is, you know, you can have a bowl of candy at a voter registration table, but it does not matter if a person registers to vote or not. They can simply walk by your table, pick up a piece of candy and keep moving. And so that is like the kind of simplest way that I can explain what we are and aren't allowed to do. But I just need to clarify that because every year we get those questions.
Yeah, and I know we can't. I mean, by law, we can't. We did, which was a little confusing. We did for the primary of 2020, but obviously that was an animal of its own. We're trying not to go back to that. I would say you spoke of nursing homes earlier, assisted living, those types of things. We engage, we personally work with each assisted living facility and nursing home in our area. We're doing the National Voter Registration Day push with them next week and making sure all of their permanent residents have updated their addresses. We send bipartisan teams out to the nursing homes to actually vote with the residents. So if they can't come out or if they can't do it by themselves, it's getting done properly. That's been something that, I mean, they make it a whole celebration day at one of our local nursing homes that they all get to wear red, white, and blue, and they get their flags and they feel like they're still being a part of it. So those are things I don't know if every board is going that far to make sure. I know we offer it, but we really kind of push what we do. Going back to, there was a question earlier about felons. We do get a list monthly, conviction list that are charged with a felony that are incarcerated. So we do have to remove those from the rolls if they are incarcerated of a felony. So we send them a letter notifying them that they have been removed for this. We also notify them that once their incarceration is over, they can re-register to vote again. So that's kind of where we're at. We clarify all the time to make sure they're not sending us just a list of felonies, that they're specifically incarcerated for a felony, to make sure we're not missing anything in that gap there. That's another thing we really want to make sure that if people are in that situation, if you guys are working with any of them, we're going to send that letter to the last known address that we have. If we get like in care of the correction center instead of an address from them, all we can do is send them that notice, and we want to make sure they get it. We send it by forwardable mail, but those are things that we can help if everybody's willing to help us and keep their addresses up to date.
Thank you so much, Tonya. So I have like kind of some very case specific questions that I'd like to ask you regarding really people of transient populations in general, but today we're specifically talking about homeless people and people who are housing insecure, but it might cross lines. So first, for a person who is homeless, what would they use as their mailing address for that purpose? What is the law state, and what is your suggestion?
It is stated that they would use the address they plan to go back to. So if they're planning on going back to a shelter, or if they're planning on going back, to a home, if they're moving around at that point, I know it's been said multiple times in multiple speeches that you can register wherever you lay your head. They can't get mail there. Like, we can't get their notifications there. You know, if you're on a park bench, I get that, but we can't get to you. We don't know how to help you.
Do shelters typically, like, do they allow that? Do they allow people to use the shelter as a?
Ours has, I don't know what all of them do.
Marcus, can you comment on that? Is that something that shelters typically allow?
Yeah, generally shelters do have some kind of mail service. Most of them do.
Like, what, is there any other addresses or things that you could recommend to people that, you know, if they are homeless? You know, I know that a shelter might be like a temporary living space, or it might be something you are not necessarily at every evening. Are there any other places that a person might be able to use as a permanent, or at least for voting purposes, as a registration address?
I mean, I would say it depends on the person. If they go to, you know, like a health center a lot, or, you know, community center, then, you know, they could talk to the staff there about receiving mail. So it just kind of depends. Shelters generally though are happy to, I mean, they recognize the challenge that people have. It's probably in most cases, if somebody is, you know, staying at a shelter, or at least occasionally going to a shelter, that's probably the best bet for somebody.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, we allow them to have mail come here. That we recommend that they have their mail come here, because a lot, for just benefits and everything else that's going on, they have access to get their mail here. So we definitely recommend that they do that. And even though they're transitioning, they're still here for quite a bit of time, most times. So if they leave and say they get something from a voter, you know, voters or any type of mail, we hold it for a while, and then we call them, because we usually get an address and a phone number from before they leave, and say, hey, you have this mail here. We don't want to send it back yet. Can you come get it? And we go from there.
So Tonya, let's say that there is somebody who registered to vote today at Tanya's shelter where she works, but I think that is typically a 30-day facility where people, or, you know, a short-term facility, generally speaking, and most likely they will not be there on election day, and they don't necessarily know where they're going to be on election day. When it comes to election day, what is your advice? Like, where would they vote? How do they vote?
You know, as it reads in the election official manual from the state, it reads that has a shelter or other location at which a person has a consistent or regular inhabitant, and to which the person has intentions of returning. Now, while it's a 30-day opening at the shelter, if there's openings, they can go back. So if it's not full, they don't have to be sleeping under the bridge. They don't have to be out on their own. They can go back to that. I'm not allowed to recommend that. I would probably use that as my address, especially if they're willing, like Sasha, to have phone numbers and contact them and let them know what's going on. I'm more than happy to take suggestions from all of you how we can reach out better. We do what we can, but I'm sure there's more that we can do, that we're allowed to do.
Right. So I'll try to make the situation a little bit more specific. So the person registered to vote, their polling place, it would be wherever the shelter is located. But they're not necessarily living there on election day. Let's just say that is where their mail is being received. Can they either go to that polling place on election day, because that is their mailing address for the time being, and have you maybe for like a mail-in ballot purpose, have their mail-in ballot purpose sent there?
They can. I would even recommend that they know about early voting if it's going to be a problem. Say they're registered there. Like this time, we're going to start voting on October 12th. October 11th is the last day to get those registrations in. So that's kind of the loophole there, where they may know more where they're going to be right after they registered. and come in and early vote at that time. Early voting also is a little bit different than election day. You can use the last 4 digits of your social security number as your ID. So say you moved to the shelter, you don't have a bill or an ID or something that says that address, and you're registered correctly at that address, you can use the last 4 of your social and we'll match your signature to come in and vote. I really recommend that to everybody because you never know what's going to happen in the process. We have that people that aren't homeless, you know, they're moving in the middle of early voting. They've sold their house, they're processing here. We can't change their address till after the election. Normally, they'll come in and vote a provisional ballot. We'll verify that they haven't voted where they were registered after the election, and then the board will vote to accept that or not. That's the same thing. We could do that if they wanted to vote in a different address. If they want to put an address, they are there at a new address. It's up to our board to accept that address or not, but that would actually give them the opportunity to vote where they're living. And then it would give them the opportunity to have their address changed for them just by voting that provisional ballot. So they won't be turned away to vote.
Right.
Different options.
That is a great transition into voter ID, which I also wanted to ask you about. But voter ID is an issue for a lot of transient populations, not just homeless voters who probably may not have a driver's license, but lots of college students don't have driver's license. Older senior citizens may not have a driver's license. And so most eligible voters are going to know the last 4 digits of their social security number, and you can early vote with the last 4 digits of your social security number. I am going to use this opportunity to encourage our local leagues to try and organize rides to the polls for those populations, not on election day, but to your early voting center, because that's where things are going to be the easiest for them. So for somebody who wants to vote on election day, if they don't have a driver's license and they are homeless, or they are a college student who might not have a driver's license, what do you suggest that they can use typically for voting on election day as an ID?
You can use any government document if they have any type of pay stub that has their address, any type of bill, you know, like a utility bill, any type of bank statement. I know this is stretching for some of the people we're looking to help out. It can be just a regular Ohio ID. That's something that they'll accept. Even if it's the wrong address, they don't have to pay to update the address. If they're registered at the correct address, we can use that as a photo ID. There's a lot of gray area for election day, and we understand that, and it gets confusing when they come into early vote as opposed to election day. If they only have the last 4 of their social, they'll be given a provisional ballot on election day. They will still be allowed to vote. We can verify that with their registration and do the research later to make sure they didn't vote any other way or vote by mail, that type of thing. But there's at least that option. I can't speak for other boards. Our board is very accepting, as long as we can identify everything is correct, that they make sure every vote counts. Generally, the ones they reject are as if you're not registered in Ohio at all. So we check every county in Ohio. If you've moved to our county and didn't change your address, we'll check that other county. We'll make sure you didn't vote there. And then our board has the opportunity to accept that ballot. So even if they don't get their registration done, come see us anyway. We want you to vote. We want everybody to vote.
Great, thank you. I want to take a moment here to ask about college students, which I know is very different from homeless voters, but again, they have that kind of commonality of being a transient voter. So something that is not known to a lot of people, and you can talk about this more, Tonya, is that you kind of alluded to it earlier. They can choose where they want to vote. They, you know, if they are, live in a dorm or temporary housing, home can be where their parents are, or home can be their college address. I know there are some rules about when you pick your college address to be your voting address. is it the central college address or is it your dorm or what exactly is? Because I know there are issues around having a PO box.
Yeah. We have that problem here in Defiance because all the mail goes to the central address. So we actually here have been asking them to put the college address, but their unit number for their dorm, which alleviates the problem of not going to their physical address. So that's an option. Some people get mail directly at their dorms. It kind of depends on, there's a lot of kids with off-campus housing. They can use that address even if they're going back home. If they feel that that's where they want to vote to make their decisions on their location at that time, they're more than welcome to. One big thing I've noticed that becomes a problem though, is colleges usually get done late April, early May. So those kids come back home. They're still registered at their college address. So they're not registered in their home community. So then they're in turn going to have to vote a provisional ballot. It'll get checked from their college community, but they're also not going to get the letters that are going out to people who are registered at that address. They're not going to be getting the information. Even number general years, they're not going to get the absentee application. So if they're going to be registering at a college address, they really need to be aware of when they go back home, they need to update their address.
That's a great piece of advice. Thank you so much. We have switching back here to a kind of people who may be in more housing insecure situation. Dan Lotz asked, for those voters who choose to list a church, community center, etc., as their registration address, what kind of proof of address may be possible for them to use? We touched on this a little bit, but if you have a driver's license and it's fine if it doesn't match, a church residence or something like that, and that's where you're registered to vote.
Correct. When you come in, done correctly, they will check your ID. They will ask you to recite your name and address. Driver's license being a photo ID or a state ID, the address does not have to match your registration. They have it as the photo ID. So as long as you're reciting, this is the address I'm living at, you'll vote normal at the address that you have for your registration.
Is the same true for other forms of identification, like you said, a letter that was mailed somewhere? If it's different from the church residence, is that an acceptable form of ID? Like a
It
government?
has to be a government document.
Has to be a government document.
So,
And does it
or
have
some
to
type
be-
of electric bill, that bank
Mm.
statement, that type of thing. So it has to be some form of government document. If they're getting paperwork like from Job and Family Services, that has some sort of information on it that they've given them, that's a government document. People get real confused with passports. We don't accept passports.
Yeah.
It does not have an address on it of any kind. So that's not an acceptable one. But I think that's where the gray area again is between early voting and election day voting.
Yeah. And so I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, Tonya, like if the person is going to use like a church or community center as a mailing, as a voter registration address, I would check and see if there's a way that they can use it as a mailing address for some other piece of mail as well, for there to be more than just a voter registration purpose.
Right.
For that address, that they have another document with that address on there.
I mean, even if it's social security information, something being sent out like that, that's a government document.
Yeah.
So I do
Required.
want to grab on something real quick that I saw in the chat on people with dementia. I just wanted to let everybody know, we offer a ballot to everybody in the nursing home unless they have been legally declared incompetent. It is not for their children to decide if they're going to vote or not. It is not for the person offering it at the nursing home. It is a doctor and judge have to legally declare them incompetent. Otherwise, they have every right to vote, just like everybody else.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. We're going to wrap up here as we're over our hour, and I don't want to keep our guests any longer. I really appreciate all of you being here. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions today, but please feel free to reach out to me personally, and I'll try to help you work through any additional questions that you may have if we didn't get to them today. A final thank you to all of our guests for helping us by working through all of these issues. I know that these are sometimes kind of, complex, and there's a lot of gray area. But this is a really important topic for a lot of people, and a group of people that are often not really addressed when it comes to voting in elections. So we really appreciate you helping us through this.
I do want to grab real quick before you guys go. If you are doing voter registration drives, they have to be in our offices within 5 days of you receiving them. So please be aware, the quicker you get them to us, the better we can get them in the system. And if we get them after the date of October 11th, we're not going to be able to process those. So all the boards of elections in Ohio will be open till 9 o'clock on October 11th. So we can have them timestamped correctly if you do a drive at the last minute and want to get them to us.
Thank you, Tonya. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week, everyone. Bye-bye.